My wife called me nobody on my birthday, so I quietly walked away, rebuilt my power in silence, and let precision replace revenge in the endgame slow. "You're nobody." That's what she said. On my birthday, in my kitchen, holding the gift I paid for in a house I refinanced so her mother could quit her job and find herself. Rachel, my stepdaughter, didn't even blink when she said it. 16, smug, wearing a sweatshirt from some Ivy League she hadn't even applied to yet. Behind her, my wife Melanie smirked like she was watching a sitcom rerun. Same look she used to give me when I forgot to take the trash out. Except now it carried something colder, meaner. "You were always just temporary," Melanie added, reaching for the orange juice like she just ordered an appetizer. "Brian builds companies." Brian, the name dropped like a wine stain on white carpet. I didn't need the last name. I'd seen the late-night texts, the sudden interest in consulting retreats, the way she started going to the gym and lipstick. I'd even seen the laptop left open. FaceTime paused mid-grin on a man who looked like he moisturized with arrogance and crypto, but I never said a word, not even when I saw her turn our bedroom into her walk-in closet. Not even when Rachel stopped calling me David and started calling me him because I was playing a different game. Listen, quick break. We set a goal to hit 10,000 subscribers, so tap subscribe if you're liking these wild stories of betrayal. Now, let's get back to the madness. So, when Melanie handed me a card, no gift, just a grocery store birthday card signed with her initials, I didn't react. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I poured my coffee, sat at the table in front of my untouched German chocolate cake, and listened to them discuss Brian like I'd already passed away. Then, I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out a thick envelope, cream-colored, sealed in red wax, not for drama, but because I knew it would make her hesitate. I placed it next to my plate. Melanie stopped mid-sentence. Rachel looked at it like it was ticking. I stood. "Thank you for breakfast," I said. That's all. No raised voice, no bitter sarcasm, just a calm, almost polite farewell. And I walked out. Not just out of the kitchen, out of the house, out of the charade, out of the skin I'd worn for too damn long, pretending their approval meant anything. As I shut the front door behind me, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could already feel the shift, the discomfort, the questions they wouldn't ask until too late. I drove away without checking the mirror. By sunset, my phone was deactivated. By nightfall, my bank accounts were rerouted. By the time Melanie texted, "Where are you?" I'd already closed the account the message was sent to. You don't scream at people like that. You don't fight. You just leave the table they thought they had set for you. Because when someone tells you you're a nobody, the real power comes when you show them how quiet somebody can be. 3 hours after I walked out, I was off the grid. Not in the melodramatic, living in a cabin, eating beans from a can kind of way. No, this was strategic deletion. I'd been preparing for months. Mail rerouted to a private box 2 states over. A new LLC filed in a name no one had heard in decades, mine before the first marriage. My lawyer, Wallace, had every document pre-signed and filed under quiet trigger conditions. As far as the system was concerned, David Monroe had folded. Gone. Not a missing person, just someone who'd finally gotten tired of playing the family idiot. Melanie texted, called, then nothing. She assumed I was spiraling, heartbroken. Maybe holed up in some motel with a bottle of regret. Good. Because while she went back to breakfast smoothies and Brian's protein shake grin, I was doing something far more interesting. I was reappearing, not in her life, in his. The mistake Brian made, his fatal one, was assuming I had no value, that I was just some gray-haired tax write-off with a thinning hairline and a vinyl record collection. He never once asked what I did before I became stepdad David. See, once upon a time, before Melanie, before Rachel, before real estate brochures and marriage therapy, and can we talk about your communication style? I'd been someone. I'd been early in tech. Not the flashy kind, the infrastructure kind, the wiring, the sweat work, the foundation people forget exists once the glass walls and IPO buzzwords go up. Back then, I helped seed capital for companies most people now couldn't imagine life without. And one of those people I helped, Richard Kellman, better known now as the silent co-founder of Vector One, the same Vector One that Brian now claimed to be building from scratch. 1 week after I left, Melanie's coworker Joanne, the one who always brought bland chicken salad and overshared during HR Zoom calls, asked the question that started the unraveling. Wasn't your husband on the advisory board for Vector One? Melanie blinked. No, that's Brian's company. Joanne tilted her head. No, I mean your ex-husband, David. His name's in the new board filings. They sent the update last night. Melanie excused herself mid-meeting and speed-walked to her office. She searched there. It was Board of Advisors, Vector One Holdings, David Monroe, a new entry, fresh ink. But worse, there was a file attached to the SEC update, a PDF, dry and technical, but with 3 words that hit like a migraine, non-executive strategic counsel. It meant I wasn't just a passive name. It meant I had influence. She stared at the screen. Tried to remember the last time I mentioned tech. When she last asked what I did before she made me her husband prop for family holiday cards. She hadn't, because in her world, I'd been decorative. Now I was structural. Brian would find out soon enough when his funding request hit a compliance snag. When Richard forwarded him a memo with my notes in the margins. When the man he thought he'd replaced with charm and a Tesla suddenly held the keys to the back end of his empire. Melanie didn't text me again after that. But I know what she did next. She opened the envelope. Too late. Brian was in his element. Standing in front of a half-circle of VCs in designer sneakers and Patagonia vests, he clicked through his slides, like a TED Talk runner-up, with a trust fund complex. Terms like frictionless scaling, cross-platform synergy, and AI-enhanced verticals rolled off his tongue like buzzword confetti. Smug didn't cover it. The man thought he was rewriting Silicon Valley from a WeWork lounge until he walked in. No fanfare, no greeting, just a slow creak of the conference room door and the arrival of someone who didn't belong, but clearly outranked everyone in the room. Older, heavy-set silver tie clip, sharp eyes that scanned the room like he'd already read every LinkedIn bio at the table and found them all laughable. He didn't sit, didn't shake hands. He just looked directly at Brian and said calmly, "Founding rights are murky. You want to clean that up before Series B, otherwise the cap table won't hold." The room went dead quiet. Brian stammered something about NDAs and early-stage fluidity, but the man ignored him completely, turned to one of the junior partners and asked, "Has your firm done diligence on the 2014 debt instruments that seeded their early infrastructure?" The partner blinked. I don't think you should," the man interrupted. "There's a clause in the fallback agreement that makes this entire pitch legally ambitious." He left before Brian could form a full sentence. By the time Brian got back to their condo that evening, the smirk was gone. No Tesla charging Instagram posts. No passive flexes about VC brunches, just quiet intention. Melanie was on the couch trying to pretend she hadn't spent the last hour Googling everything she could about Delaware corporate law. She looked up as he entered. Brian didn't say hello. He dropped his bag, loosened his tie. Then, like a man who had just realized he wasn't the apex predator in the room, he asked, "Who's Richard K?" She froze. The air shifted. Not what? Who? Richard Kellman. That name had been sealed away like a box labeled before me. Melanie's mouth opened, but her voice didn't follow. Because Richard Kellman wasn't just a name from David's past. He was her late husband's best friend. The one who cried at the funeral. The one who stopped visiting after she remarried too quickly. The one who vanished quietly when David entered the picture and apparently never truly left. Worse, he was loyal. David once told her that Richard was the kind of man who never forgot a debt. That when David saved Richard's company during the 2008 crash by cashing out his own 401k, Richard swore he'd return the favor in silence and with scale. She thought it was just one of those masculine friendship things men say when they drink too much. Apparently, it wasn't. Brian sat down across from her, leaned forward and lowered his voice. "Your ex-husband just brought a knife to a gunfight, and he's the only one who knew where all the bullets were buried." She didn't respond because deep down, she knew it wasn't a gunfight anymore. It was an execution. And David wasn't done. David didn't go off the grid. He went back to the roots. While Melanie imagined pacing motel carpets and scribbling in tear-soaked journals, he was actually drinking single malt on a porch in northern Vermont, overlooking a lake Richard Kellman now called home. Not the kind of lake you find on travel blogs. This one was private, quiet, no cell towers, no influencers. Just strategy, stories, and silence between two men who understood what the long game actually meant. David wasn't hiding. He was rebuilding, consulting, advising, drawing out war plans over bourbon with a man who'd once slept in his guest room during the worst year of his life. "I told you I'd pay it back," Richard muttered one night, staring into the flames of the stone hearth. "You're doing more than that," David replied. "You're helping me remind them I was never temporary. I was waiting." Meanwhile, back in their high-rise apartment, Melanie was discovering just how much could unravel when the person you dismiss starts pulling threads. Rachel, her darling daughter, future Columbia undergrad, Brian's biggest fan, screamed from her room when her iPad refused to connect to their shared family cloud. "It's not showing my music. Why is Dad's old Spotify even on this thing?" she yelled. Melanie brushed it off until her own phone froze mid-purchase at Whole Foods. Declined twice. "Try another card," the cashier mumbled, already reaching for the next customer. She did, declined again. When she got home, there was a fraud alert email in her inbox from the bank, but the flagged charge wasn't from Nigeria or Vietnam. It was a dinner receipt from the same Vermont town Richard had vanished to. 3 guests, no details, just a handwritten tip line signed, "Appreciate your loyalty." That wasn't the only oddity. Brian, already rattled from the pitch meeting debacle, logged into the Vector 1 backend to check on the latest IP filings, standard patent tracking for an upcoming product line they were planning to license out. But something was wrong. His name was gone from everything. Design credits, algorithmic contributions, even the original submission metadata, gone. Like he'd never touched the damn thing. Instead, the patents were now associated with a new entity, DMK Consulting. Small though, registered in Delaware. And the listed contacts, David Monroe, Richard Kellman. Brian exploded. "This has to be a clerical error," he shouted, slamming his laptop shut. But he knew better. Everyone in this world knows IP changes don't happen by accident. They happen in boardrooms, in silence, with signatures made months ago. Melanie stood there watching him unravel, unable to speak because deep down she knew what was happening. David hadn't disappeared. He'd positioned. And the worst part, he wasn't gloating. He wasn't even visible. He was operating like a ghost with a scalpel, making incisions so precise they wouldn't even feel the cuts until they'd already started bleeding out. The subject line was deceptively plain. Notice of filed agreement. Separation of joint marital assets. Monroe versus Monroe. Melanie almost deleted it, assuming it was another lawyer fishing for clients. Then she saw the sender, Cinder, a boutique firm from Boston. One David had mentioned once years ago back when they still shared dreams over diner pancakes and not cold stares across the kitchen island. She opened it, read the first line, then read it again. David had filed for asset separation 3 months ago. It was backdated, legally binding, signed, notarized quietly, officially, and completely without her knowledge. There was a note from the attorney included, as per the conditions agreed upon during preliminary arbitration. Your awareness is considered established by receipt of the sealed envelope delivered on her birthday. Her hands trembled. That envelope, the one she laughed at, the one she left on the kitchen table under a coupon flyer and later used as a coaster for a mimosa. She never opened it. Thought it was dramatic flair, a symbolic gesture from a man she assumed was too passive to ever really walk away. It wasn't symbolic. It was a bomb with a delayed fuse. Brian walked in mid-panic, still trying to get through to Vector 1's CTO, who wasn't answering calls. He noticed her expression immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, dropping his laptop bag on the floor. She didn't speak, just turned the screen toward him. He scrolled, paused. His eyes narrowed. "This references our shared equity," he muttered. "Why is he? Oh, come on. No, this clause links our joint holdings in the household trust to board influence. What the hell?" And she finally found her voice. "What does that mean, Brian?" "It means," he said, voice low and tight, "that he didn't just file for separation. He did it in a way that attached your assets to my future shares. He looped your half of the household trust into his legal leverage. And since you used the trust to partially co-invest in Vector 1, your name is tied to my equity pool." He looked up at her like she just handed a live grenade to their enemy. "You married a man who knew what leverage meant." Melanie blinked. She had spent years thinking David was a placeholder, a polite, outdated piece of furniture that collected dust in the corner of her life while she renovated her future with a startup cowboy who quoted Steve Jobs and wore designer hoodies. But now David wasn't just reclaiming dignity. He was unweaving them thread by thread, not with a meltdown, not with lawyers and alimony threats, but with fine print and filing so methodically planted even their accountants hadn't noticed. Brian stood up and grabbed his phone. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To beg for my own company back," he muttered, dialing furiously. Melanie sat there alone, staring at the blinking cursor in the email reply box. Her name, Melanie Monroe, still stared back from the header. For the first time since the kitchen that morning, the words hit her differently. Monroe, not a name she wore, a name she borrowed. And the man she borrowed it from just turned it into a weapon. The restaurant was one of those places where the valet doesn't ask your name, he already knows it. Soft jazz, custom menus, centerpieces so tall they could have had zip codes. Everyone at the table had money, or the scent of it trailing close behind. Champagne flutes sparkled like they were trying to eavesdrop. David sat at the far end, relaxed, in a crisp suit, no tie, exuding the kind of confidence that doesn't need volume. To his right was Richard Kellman. Across the table, fund managers, legacy investors, one ex-senator turned angel. It wasn't just dinner. It was a message. The place cards were printed on heavyweight cardstock. No mistakes. So when Brian walked in 3 minutes late and noticeably out of breath, there was no seat for him, no introduction, no chair pulled out. He lingered, standing like someone who crashed a funeral thinking it was a networking event. David didn't flinch, just sipped his wine and carried on listening to Richard recount the story of Vector One's early infrastructure challenges, leaving out Brian entirely. Naturally, names were named, but not his. Brian finally cleared his throat. I wasn't aware this dinner was happening tonight. Richard didn't look up. David did. He didn't sneer, didn't smirk. He simply raised his glass and said calmly, deliberately, to history and those who respect it. A beat, then applause. Not thunderous, not mocking, worse, polite, affirming, the kind of applause that says, "You're not needed here." Brian stood frozen, unsure whether to fake a laugh or fake a phone call. In the end, he just left quickly. No goodbyes, a ghost retreating into his own irrelevance. The waiter quietly removed the empty plate that had been set as a contingency. No one asked about him again. That night, Melanie was sitting on the couch when her phone buzzed. "Brian, he locked me out of my own data. Legal didn't even see it coming. What the hell did he file?" She didn't answer, didn't even open the full thread. Just turned the phone face down and let the silence breathe, because she understood now. David didn't bluff. He didn't threaten. He simply waited for the moment everyone assumed he was done, and then reminded them. He wasn't loud, he was accurate. And now, he was visible. Not as the husband they discarded, but as the man they should have never underestimated. It started with a text from her sister. Just 5 words. I ran into David. Radiant. Not better, not doing okay. Radiant. As if the man she'd mocked into oblivion had emerged from the ashes, moisturized, centered, and somehow 6 pounds lighter. Melanie stared at the screen, unsure whether to be annoyed or afraid. 2 days later, her brother called, the same brother who once joked that David's personality was like dry toast, the one who never invited him to poker night even when they were married. Now his tone was clipped, accusatory. "I saw the fundraiser live stream," he said. "You were cruel. Why wouldn't he retaliate?" She blinked. "What fundraiser?" he scoffed. "Jesus, Melanie, the one for Veterans Healthcare sponsored by Kellman Group." David gave the closing speech. He crushed it. Talked about integrity, about rebuilding your identity when people take it from you. He had the whole room standing. And did you know he donated his entire advisory retainer to launch a recovery program for laid-off engineers over 50? Huh. Yeah, you didn't know. That's the problem. He hung up. Then came the worst moment yet. Rachel, her daughter, the one who used to roll her eyes at David, who once said he smelled like old furniture and mocked him for still using a landline. She stood in the doorway to Melanie's room, holding her phone. A screenshot pulled up. It was from Twitter. A freeze frame of David at the fundraiser, arms around 2 war vets, smiling, truly smiling for the first time in years. "Why'd you laugh at him?" Rachel asked quietly. Melanie turned from the mirror. "What? That morning, on his birthday, you laughed. You and Brian, like he was a joke." Melanie inhaled slowly. "Sweetheart, I didn't mean to—" "But you did." Rachel's voice didn't rise. "You laughed. I did too. And I didn't even know why, just followed your lead, but now everyone's saying he's incredible. Even my English teacher posted his speech." She called it essential viewing for anyone who's ever been underestimated. Melanie's throat closed. The walls of her curated world, the brunch circle, the condo board, the corporate ladies' night group chats, were cracking. Not loudly, quietly, subtly. No one said it outright, but she noticed fewer replies, fewer tags, fewer smiles, and more reposts of David's speech, more LinkedIn mentions, more "so proud to know him" comments, under the video of him shaking hands with Kellman, surrounded by veterans, engineers, board members, people who mattered. She tried defending herself to her sister. "He abandoned us. You laughed at him. He blindsided me legally. He rebuilt something without you." She tried calling Brian, but his phone went straight to voicemail. She tried messaging Rachel later that night. No reply, just silence. Not the David kind. Strategic, cold, calculated. This silence was different. It was earned, and it was spreading. She found out the same way the rest of the world did, through a push notification. Breaking, Vector One acquired in quiet buyout. $190 million valuation rumored. Melanie blinked at her screen. Thought it was a mistake, maybe some other company, some other vector. But the subheadline removed all doubt. Deal led by private holding group based in Vermont. Names linked to Richard Kellman and David Monroe. Her ears rang. She opened the article, skimmed past the gushing words about the company's promise, its clean infrastructure, its remarkable leadership transition, the comments speculating whether it was a precursor to something bigger, a roll-up, maybe even a pre-IPO maneuver. But one line stopped her cold. Brian R. Caldwell's equity appears to have been diluted during late-stage negotiations. Unconfirmed reports suggest a clause was activated that reclassified his contributions as non-founding. Non-founding. The man who had once introduced himself as CEO of Tomorrow at every dinner party was now being legally referred to as a former contributor. She switched apps, typed frantically into LinkedIn. Brian's profile untouched, still read founder and CEO, Vector 1. But his last update was 2 weeks old. No post, no celebration, no bragging, nothing. Then, almost like a synchronized strike, her own inbox pinged. A short email, no greeting, no sign-off. Subject, correction request, profile inaccuracy. Dear Melanie, as part of the brand streamlining following the recent acquisition, we kindly request you update your LinkedIn biography to remove the line, co-founder's wife, Vector 1. This phrase does not reflect a formal role, nor is it appropriate in professional designation. Thank you for your cooperation. She stared at it. No rage, just paralysis. All those brunches, the panels, the networking events where she'd introduced herself with that line, Brian's the brain, I'm the brand. And now she was being asked to scrub it like a wine stain from a white dress. She scrolled down, clicked open her own LinkedIn. It still said it, bold. Right there in the bio she'd agonized over during spin class, CEO founder's wife, brand strategist building futures with vision. Now it just looked pathetic. She hovered over the edit button, paused, scrolled up, clicked on David's name. He had posted something that morning, a quote, paired with a photo of him and Richard in front of the lake, sleeves rolled, laughing like men who already knew what the end of the game looked like. The quote, revenge is for amateurs, precision is permanent, no hashtags, no links, no flex, just a sentence, and 8,400 likes. She switched back to her profile and stared at the cursor blinking beside the title she used to think meant something, CEO founder's wife. No, she couldn't even remember what exactly she had co-founded. The man she'd mocked into silence hadn't just won. He'd rewritten the story, so she wasn't even in it. It was a plain package. No sender, no return address, just her name written in tight, meticulous lettering, the kind you'd expect on legal forms, not on cardboard boxes. Melanie opened it in the kitchen with a steak knife, expecting maybe a courier mistake or one of those weird apology baskets from a PR firm trying to get ahead of bad press. It wasn't a basket. It wasn't even padded, just a single photo. Matte finish, heavy stock, no frame. It showed a log cabin nestled in the curve of a mountain valley. There was snow on the edges of the roof, sunlight slicing through the trees behind it. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the three people in the foreground. David, of course, standing relaxed, hair tousled by the wind, wearing a thermal Henley that made him look 10 years younger. A coffee mug in hand, smiling. Next to him, Richard Kellman, grinning in mid-conversation, sleeves rolled up, clipboard under his arm. And then, over. At first, Melanie's brain didn't register it. Too much disbelief. But the posture, the eyebrows, the way she stood slightly sideways like she was trying to look taller. She'd seen it 1,000 times at school plays, in dressing room mirrors. Rachel, her daughter, standing beside David, laughing with him, holding a drill in one hand, a tablet in the other, hair tied back, wearing a hoodie with a logo she didn't recognize until she squinted and saw the tiny lettering, DMK Systems. Not Vector, not Brian's World, David's. They weren't just posing, they were working. And on the back of the photo, in David's unmistakable handwriting, were 7 words, she knows what real legacy looks like. Melanie sat down hard. The chair scraped against the tile. She read the sentence again. Legacy. The word she used to throw around at dinner parties when Brian was pitching investors in their living room. The word she used to justify turning David into an afterthought. A placeholder. The man you settled for before the actual story begins. But David had rewritten the ending. Not just for himself, but for Rachel, her daughter, who used to call him nobody, who once giggled behind his back during family therapy, who wore Brian's startup hoodie like it was a badge of coolness. She had switched teams, not out of rebellion, not out of pity, but because legacy wasn't about brand decks and LinkedIn bios. It was about standing next to someone who showed up even when you spit in his face. And David, He showed up every Sunday morning, helping with homework, every flu season, holding her hair when she puked, every school dance, waiting in the car with snacks and tissues. She just didn't see it. Not then. Now it was too late. Melanie sat there, the photo trembling in her hands, wondering how many times she'd said David's name like it meant nothing, and how many more times she'd have to say it now, knowing it meant everything. There were no threats, no lawsuits, no dramatic scenes, just a photo and a sentence, and the unmistakable, suffocating feeling that she'd lost something far more permanent than a man. She'd lost the one witness to her cruelty, and the one person who had quietly forgiven her daughter for it. She didn't pack a bag, didn't grab a coat, didn't even lock the condo. She just drove. Phone on silent, radio off, windows cracked to let the cold sting her awake. Her nails dug into the steering wheel like it could somehow steer her toward a version of reality where this wasn't happening, where she hadn't lost everything to him, of all people. The road twisted through black pines and frost-slicked turns, each mile louder than the last, not because of noise but because of silence, because for the first time in her life, Melanie had nowhere to hide behind. No smirks, no status, no curated filters or perfect bios, just guilt, raw and unfiltered. By the time she reached the cabin, it was near 2 a.m. The gravel under her tires cracked like bones. A faint amber glow spilled from the windows. He was awake. Of course he was. David had always been the type who couldn't sleep when something was unfinished. She stepped out, bare arms. No plan, just motion. Marched up to the door and knocked hard, then again and again. "David!" she croaked. "Please!" No answer. Then the knob turned. The door creaked open. And there he was. Older, yes, but not tired, not broken, just calm. The kind of calm that made your lungs forget how to work. He didn't say a word, didn't invite her in. He just looked at her with the same expression he wore that morning in the kitchen. Only now, it wasn't masked pain. It was peace. "I know I screwed up," she whispered, the words rushing out like water through a cracked dam. I laughed. "I followed Brian. I was awful to you." "I know, but Rachel forgives you. She sees you now. That has to count for something. Please, I just want to understand. I want to know why you 10 minutes. She talked for 10 full minutes. Tears, regret, apologies, promises. David let her say it all, didn't interrupt, just listened as if each word was a note in a song he already knew the lyrics to. Then he turned, walked to a shelf, pulled something down, and placed it in her hands. The envelope, the exact same one, cream paper, red wax, still sealed. "You never opened it," he said. Her breath caught. With shaking fingers, she cracked the seal, peeled back the flap. Inside, a single sheet. No documents, no threats, just a sentence handwritten in a steady, slanted print. "This is the last time you'll ever underestimate me." No signature, no punctuation, just the full weight of everything she thought he wasn't now staring her in the face. She looked up, but the door was already closing. Not slammed, just closing softly, deliberately. Final.